No, I am not a set designer. Yes, I've officially lost count of the number of times I've read Wicked, as evidenced by the condition that this book is in. And no, I did not like the movie. I'm aware I am woefully late to the party at the Oz's Ballroom, but I used to think I was literally the reincarnation of Elphaba for a while. Coping mechanism. Plus, I feel like all discussions around any type of design are relevant to home design. So, here I am. I've been interested in basically every subset of design at some point or another, from web design to floral design to set design, albeit on much smaller budgets. And when I was in 7th grade, I decided that I wanted to go to the Tisch School of the Arts and study costume design and become the next Susan Hilferty, who was the costume designer for the stage musical. Clearly that didn't happen, otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here on my bedroom floor talking at a camera. But you know what I always say? Fail big and fail publicly. Actually, I don't know if I've ever actually said that out loud in person, but if that isn't a fantastic transition into today's video, I don't know what is. Before we actually start looking at the set, I want to quickly get my personal feelings out of the way so I don't go flying off the handle. Long story short, I hated this movie. That's basically it. I know a lot of people loved this movie. I've been both waiting for and also dreading the release of this movie for at least 15 years now. It's unfortunately exactly what I expected it to be, which is just a movie version of the musical, with virtually no reference to the books whatsoever. They really just wanted to bring in a new generation of an audience for the stage musical and expand the Wicked cinematic universe in general, and in doing that, they sacrificed the essence of the characters and the story that the musical was originally based on, and just like the overall vibe of the book in general. As anyone who has ever read any book that was turned into a movie will tell you, the book is so much better. I know that's become its own trope at this point, but my god, the book is so much better. Gregory Maguire is the true magician here, not Elphaba. He creates the most viscerally believable worlds, and I genuinely think he's one of the most prolific writers of this time. So please, please, please go read the book. Okay. Rant over. If you're new here, my name is Medora. I use they, them pronouns, and I usually make videos about home design for girls, gays, and theys, but today we're looking at the set design from the new movie version of Wicked, especially focusing on interiors, but I'll do my best to point out anything that might be relevant to interior design at all. I've watched a few different videos from other creators about the movie generally, but nothing much about the set design in particular. I know a few fun facts, like how they planted 9 million tulips for the opening scene, and how that train is actually real even though it somehow kind of still looks CGI, but whatever. Overall, one of their big goals was to do as little CGI as possible, and to mostly just use it for things like removing the people in green screen who were pushing the boats through the canal, instead of adding in all sorts of special effects and scenery and stuff, which I definitely appreciate. I think in general, across the board, both in movies and otherwise, the more we can get back to real, tangible things, the better. So I definitely think that was a noble goal. So like I said, I don't really know that much going into this, at least when you're comparing it to the decade-long autistic special interest that I had in the book and the musical. Not that much. So anyways, that was probably like a 5-minute intro. So let's head over to my Notion where I plan out all of my videos, and let's start looking at pictures of all of these sets. Okay, so this is the tulips that they planted, the 9 million tulips. So while I'm not obsessed with like the aesthetic of this in terms of comparing it to the book, and also just the practical world building, because the Munchkinlanders are supposed to be very agrarian, the tulips don't make any sense to me. But it is gorgeous, and I have to give them credit for committing to the bit, because they did. I know the yellow brick road is kind of iconic, but like, it just doesn't quite hit for me. I wish they would have done more of like a metallic gold kind of color rather than just yellow, because this yellow brick road was kind of supposed to symbolize like the American dream and all that and whatever, and so I feel like it's not quite giving everything that it could give. It feels very flat, it feels very one-dimensional, and I feel like there could just be like a little bit more pomp and circumstance around the whole thing, at least with a Disney-fied version of what they were trying to do with this movie. I do love that from this picture you can see the silhouettes and house shapes of Munchkinland. I do love the look of the thatch roofs, but they don't seem the most practical, and also where are they getting all of that material? Like, I don't see any grasslands around here at all. It is just tulips. So I'm curious where they got all the material for that and how they dyed it, because that is bright red and bright yellow. It would not be easy to dye that much material and then put it on your roof. So again, I have some logistical concerns. I do like how all of the houses are kind of centered around this open square. This definitely seems like a good communal gathering spot, and I like that aspect of designing architecture for building community. That feels very realistic to me. I'm definitely curious about the practicality of this roof shape in particular. Like, what is the reason for that? The only possible thing I could think of is that like maybe they need the height to store cured meats that are hanging or something like that. Again, very confused logistically. Oh, I don't have any pictures of the inside of their house. Let me see if I can find those. Okay, I can't see much of the house in that one. You still can't see the house. Are there just not any pictures of Elphaba's house? Okay, whatever. Moving on to Shiz. I have heard that Shiz was kind of designed with like a Mediterranean influence, especially like Italian and also Islamic, which I definitely see. But I again, was not getting a Mediterranean vibe from the books. Just saying. I feel like this is one of those situations where more is more. Like, I don't necessarily love what's going on, but if you just keep looking, there is so much detail everywhere, and I think that's what makes it good in this case. It's really hard to do minimalism well, so if you just keep adding a ton of, like, ornate stuff, like all of this blue filigree down here, which I do love the blue filigree, and all of the ornate stair rails, and these little like minaret pillar thingies, and the arches, and just like all of the detail that goes into here. It kind of just starts to like work itself out because there's so much going on. Okay, now moving on to the dorm room. My initial reaction was definitely that this is way too fancy for anyone's dorm room, even for Glinda. It's so big, and there is so much stuff, and it's so intricately ornamented, especially on the ceiling. I love this mural on the ceiling. I genuinely do love that, and all of like the wood wall paneling. That's gorgeous. I'm on board with that. It just feels way too fancy for anyone's dorm room. And like, I guess there's the argument that like, she's rich. She comes from a rich family. She's popular. Like, yes. And usually all the dorm rooms at a school are relatively similar. There's always, nicer ones and ones that are a little, more budget friendly. But this just feels so over the top. I do love, however, that her bed is made of burl wood, which will make another appearance later on. Is that... Oh, I can't zoom in more, but is this the Target pillow? The fake velvet Target pillow? Because if not, it sure looks like it, and I am kind of mad about that. I do, however, love that Glinda brought in these 3 extra lamps. Now, granted, I don't love the shades that are on them. They're not very soft and moody, but I do love that she brought in extra lamps because lighting, you can have a horrible space, you can have an ugly apartment, you can have a mess everywhere, but if your lighting is good, that definitely solves at least like 93% of your problems. Now, if we compare that to Elphaba's little corner that Glinda saved for her, there's definitely a stark difference, but I'm actually kind of impressed with how they still incorporated some ornamentation that feels nice and meaningful. I love these blue flowers on the bed down here, and then I love Elphaba's like one little corner of stuff. She's got a ton of books, and then a couple little trinkets and like useful things. And then it also looks like there's some sort of oil or perfume bottle, which is definitely a nice nod to the books because she used oils to cleanse herself because she hates water. So that makes a lot of sense. And then I feel like these 2 blankets are actually like a really perfect example of what I personally love, which is simple and bare bones and kind of minimalist on the surface. But when you look into it further, there's so many little details that just make it so special. I am a little confused about how distressed the blue on the wall is. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Because if this is in fact one of the nicest dorm rooms, which it absolutely would be, you'd think that they would keep up with the painting of them at least a little bit more than something that looks like it's like 200 years old. I understand Shiz is like the old, like big university that everyone goes to and everyone wants to get into, but like, it's just not quite doing it for me. And then these flowers that are like embedded into the wall somehow, I don't know what's going on with that. That definitely confuses me. I do love a hook on the wall. A good hook is very practical and very pretty. And then this chandelier, do not try this at home. I shouldn't have to say this, but just in case there are any kids watching, please do not try this at home. Light fixtures are not intended to support the weight of a human. This is very pink, but it was the only picture I could find of the hallway outside. Again, it's just so ornate, and I'm confused about the practicality of like why a university would choose to invest so much time and energy and money into carving all of these wood detail things up here, especially in a student dorm room. I would understand that in the library or some public space where general people tend to go, but in a dorm room, it's very pretty. Don't get me wrong, but like, Oz is a colonized society just like this one, so I feel like profit and companies would make a lot of the decisions about stuff like this, and so that doesn't feel completely realistic to me. Okay, moving on to the library. This is probably one of the spaces that I have the most logistical questions about, because storing rectangular objects in a circular formation, not usually the most efficient use of space. Now, that's not always true. There's definitely a type of stacking firewood that makes the most sense in a circle, but this just feels so impractical. I do love all of the detail on these pillars. That is super neat. Again, one of those places where more is more. And I do also especially love the way that these tables are circular and kind of envelop the pillars, and the benches are also curved and will fit multiple people. It definitely feels like a good space for community building. So I do appreciate that aspect of the design. It feels very grounded in astronomy. It feels like a really cool observatory. It doesn't feel like a library to me. And then I think my biggest logistical concern of this whole entire movie is how on earth do the books not fall out of there? The books are upside down on these weird shelf thingies. How do they not fall out? Someone explain that to me, because I've been racking my brain and the only possible solution I can think of is magic, which would fit within this universe, but like, really? I understand that it makes for a very visually interesting dance scene, but it just kind of takes away from the world building and the believability. I like the reference to using, library ladders to access books, but like, I feel like this just took it a little bit too far. And then there's the logistical concerns of like, who controls the spinning mechanics of it all? How do you ensure students' safety? Like, this just does not make sense at all, and it infuriates me because it's so cool. It's objectively cool, but it doesn't make any sense. And then this isn't an interior, obviously, but I just wanted to appreciate the set designers because they created these trees. And I just want to take a second to like marvel in everything that is this design. There is so much work and thought and effort put into this, and I appreciate all of that so much. And then I won't spend too long on the train, because it's not an interior and they don't really show us too much of the interior of the train. But I do find it very fascinating that they very explicitly made a whole entire train for this, and it still looked CGI in the movie to me. And I don't know how to explain that. I also would have loved to see more like signage on this platform. I would have loved to see benches, right? Like making the platform more accessible for families and disabled people and older people. Like, there could be railings, there could be street lamps, there could be so much more happening on this platform. And I feel like they put all of their time and energy into this train and didn't think about the platform at all. Here we get a little bit of a peek into the inside, but not much. It's very Art Nouveau, very nature inspired. I mean, the whole train itself looks like a cicada. Definitely not mad about that because that is objectively cool. But like, I wish they would have made this gold doorway much more believably gold because it kind of looks like plastic. I will give the overall train design points for being aerodynamic, but I wish we could see more of the inside. I do, however, love how they incorporated those curvy handrails into the design in a way that feels really intentional and thoughtful, in a way where it just feels like it makes sense and they don't stick out. It's not like, here's the handrail, but it's just incorporated beautifully into the design. That I do love. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I think that that's maybe one of the most successful things that this film has done so far, is the way that they incorporated those handrails in a way that's both very practical and also fits the design so perfectly so that you don't even like notice that they're handrails, but you will intuitively reach for it and grab it. It's good, intuitive, thoughtful design, and I do wish that we would have more of that in our real world. Because I'm especially thinking about like accessible grab bars in bathrooms. Not pretty, not a vibe. And I really wish that we would start thinking about those in a better way, because some people need those and they can just take away from a design aesthetically so much. And I would love to see more thoughtfully designed practical things like that. And then this is the train station where they arrive in the capital city. The first thing that really stands out to me that I hate is these like emblems up here. It's just the train on there. And like, I guess you could make the argument that that is for communicating that this is the train station, but this whole design feels very much like a celebration of imperialism. And the fact that that is just a train on there feels like very lazy design to me. And I feel like it would have made a little more sense to have like the wizard or some other something like that to really take home that point of, this is like the big imposing capital that's like governed by a police state, and the train isn't really giving that. I'm also not quite sure what these motifs in the gray circle are supposed to be. They kind of look like dead fish to me, and the only connection I could make to that is Madame Morrible, but like, yeah, I would like some more background on what those symbols are supposed to be. Interestingly enough, I'm not seeing any sort of handrails on these steps. And maybe they're just on the inner wall where you can't see them, but like, there should be handrails there. Like, objectively speaking, especially with these curved steps down at the bottom. And these steps are definitely wide enough that there should be a handrail going down the middle. Now, I'm sure they did that specifically because of the big dance scene in One Short Day, but like, but again, it's just kind of one of those things that detracts from the believability of this world building that they're doing. One thing I do really appreciate about the set design overall, but especially in the Emerald City, is how they've used all sorts of different colors to get to the overall color of green. Because if you look closely in here, there's a lot of like deep desaturated teals, and there's some more like yellowy greens, and there's this gold, and it really just all reads as green. But when you look closer, there's a lot more nuance going on. And that is definitely one of the things that makes design good. Because if you just choose your accent color as green and then have all of your greens be matching, it's going to feel really flat and boring. But if you choose a bunch of different versions of analogous colors that are all like right next to each other on the color wheel, but like deeper, muted, more interesting versions of those colors, that is what will really bring your design to life. Whether it's a set or your home or a poster or whatever you're designing. And again, the amount of steps with no handrails. I know these are relatively young, spry, athletic people who are on the set, but it's just one of those things that makes it feel like a set rather than like an actual place. Okay, so now we are inside the palace, which is probably one of my favorite interiors so far in terms of communicating what it's supposed to communicate. Aesthetically, my favorite thing is the emerald floors, because everything else just looks a little too bright and artificial and like fake. But I do love their use of these giant columns and the uplighting within those columns to create this sense of like spaciousness and massive, like overwhelming authority. And I do think it was a good choice from a creative perspective to just have only those emerald floors and basically nothing else, and to really use a bunch of vertical lines to emphasize how tall the space is, because those two things combined together make the space feel, despite the colors, make the space feel very cold and uninviting, and they make you feel so much smaller and less powerful than you actually are. Again, here's another shot of those emerald floors, which are objectively beautiful, and the repetition of those giant columns really plays into the sense of like, you are entering a different space now as you pass each and every one of these columns. So I do think it makes a very interesting transition from the outside world into the palace. And another thing that helps with that is how thick those walls are. You can see over here that like the windows are within these walls that are probably 3 feet thick, which makes sense if you're the biggest military power around. So again, these are the kinds of things that really lead to the palace having this sense of power and prestige, which again, as we all know, is a complete sham, but it's all about the illusion and curating this experience so that people believe and feel a certain way. Again, like on the train, I really wish that this gold was more like gold leaf or something, because it feels really fake. It looks like plastic to me. It doesn't feel like any sort of real metal that has been worked into the shape. It doesn't feel like something that is coated in gold leaf or anything. It looks like plastic. So I don't love that. I don't think there's anything new to say with this picture. It's just the repetition, the grandness, the really ugly plasticky looking gold, the lack of handrails, stuff like that. At least the sides over here, the sides of the stairwell, look like they might be kind of handrail adjacent, but I actually really am not a huge fan of the design on this door. It feels kind of just like random spirals to me, and it's probably supposed to invoke the tornado that, spoiler alert, the tornado that Madame Morrible makes to kill Nessa Rose and make everyone fear Elphaba, and I get that it's probably that. But compared to all the other Art Nouveau that's happening in here, it feels very simple and uninspired, and I feel like they could have done a better job of that. The throne room is not necessarily what I was expecting. I think the head is perfect, but it's just all of these dangly bits that I'm like not really loving. It feels kind of jungly to me, which just doesn't fit the vibe. I'm sure they had to hide all of the animatronic stuff that was like making the head move, but it just feels kind of like a strange design to me. I understand that they were going off of the idea of, you know, when Toto goes back there and pulls back the curtain. I get that, but it's just like, it just didn't quite hit for me. And I feel like if they really wanted to commit to the bit better, there would have been 5 times as many of these little dangly things. Like, I feel like it needed to feel like this head was emerging from a forest of these like naturally occurring things. And it just, yeah, it's not doing it for me. I do, however, appreciate the spotlight on the center of the floor and how you can see the pattern of the emerald flooring. It's this like radial design in a circle with the circle in the middle and then like bits radiating out from it. It feels like a very good design choice in the sense that for people who have never been to the palace, it's very intuitive for them to be like, that's probably where I should stand. So I'll give them points for that. Again, another shot of the throne room. I think you can definitely see the flooring a lot better here, what I was describing with these concentric circles. And then one thing I don't really like about the throne room is that it kind of feels like the backstage of a production, like behind the curtains, behind the theater. And maybe that's what they were trying to go for because that would definitely make sense thematically. But like whatever is going on with this wall up here and all of these like tiny little arches and the light that's coming from behind there, it doesn't make sense to me. Maybe it's an acoustic thing. I guess that's the only like logical reason I could think of that it might make sense. And then I don't really understand this whole weird little diorama thing. Like I think it makes sense for the wizard to have a weird little diorama of all of Oz, but I don't think it makes sense for it to be in the throne room. I think this would make sense for like his personal office because this feels like the type of thing that would be an ever-growing, ever-expanding personal project. Like he's just tinkering with it all the time because he wants to feel like God. And it doesn't feel like the type of thing that would be out on display for people who come visit the wizard. And so that was a little confusing for me because I feel like he probably doesn't drop the wizard act very often to take people over here and show them the diorama. So yeah, it just feels like a strange placement for me and I was a little confused about that. And then this, I had no idea what the wizard head was made of at first. And then I saw this photo and it's burlwood. And I just think that is such a strange, neat material to use for that. Obviously, if you've been here for any amount of time, you'll know that I love burlwood, especially for like a side table or a credenza or something like that. But I just thought it was a fascinating choice that I would not have expected otherwise for the wizard head, because I assume, you know, it's definitely more lightweight than metal or anything like that. And all of these are individual pieces that move individually. So needing it to be relatively lightweight and movable would make a lot of sense logistically. And then it just adds this like really neat depth to the wood that makes it feel a little bit more lifelike and terrifying, honestly. This part of the set definitely feels like a little bit of an afterthought. And I know it's like in the back, it's meant to be more of a utilitarian design, but like, I feel like if you're the wizard, you would want to put a little more effort into the areas that you frequent. So I feel like this could be a little bit more intricate and intentionally designed. And then this isn't an interior, but it does show the outside of the building in a really neat way. You really get this good mix of the Art Nouveau in the handrails out here, and then the Art Deco in all of these like diamond shapes. And then I didn't notice during the movie that like all of this like green cladding on the outside is very like oozy and globby and organic in a very, very strange way that honestly does not make sense for the outside of a building, because do you have any idea how hard it would be to clean that? And also like when it rains, how is the water directed in a way that makes any sort of sense? Because it isn't. I can tell you that much, it isn't. So overall, am I obsessed with how the set design was used to tell the story of these characters in the most creatively fulfilling way possible? Absolutely not. Do I think that the entire team that worked on this did an objectively phenomenal job at accomplishing their vision? Yeah, something like that. Until next time.